Joanna Grover, welcome to the American Glutton podcast.
Thank you, Ethan. I'm delighted to be with you today.
So I have lost a lot of weight and I've kept it off. And I think that for sure the biggest obstacle, because many times in the past I lost weight and I found that actually losing weight was not that hard. It was keeping weight off that seemed to be the hardest part. And then there were also many times where whatever amount of weight I was looking to lose, or whatever kind of idea vaguely, because I didn't often delineate this quite thoroughly in my mind, that I had of like where I wanted to get,
Sure.
the motivation to get there was almost impossible. And I think that the way you think about things and the way you frame things in your mind
Mm-hmm.
play take up the lion's share of the actual work.
Yes.
And so I'm so excited to talk to you because your
Oh.
your book sounds fantastic and right up my alley.
Oh, good. Well, we're going to make sure and get you a copy because it's not out yet, but
Okay.
you'll get an advance copy, Ethan.
I
So,
can't wait.
oh, I'm excited for you to read it. What you said is so true. The biggest mountains are between our ears. You know, the biggest hurdles that we will ever climb. And the key is, like, if we were to really um, break it down to like a snapshot of why imagery works, is that it's what you elaborate on in your mind's eye that shapes human behavior.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so often, I mean, for me and for people I talk to who are either in the process of battling this stuff, or have clawed their way to it, so often what we are spending the lion's share of our thoughts on is negativity and garbage and how hard it is. And I think what you're talking about is kind of turning that around a little bit, right?
Well, it's putting you in the driver's seat. Essentially, you have the ability to change the channel that you're on, right? So yeah, there are a few things happening from an evolutionary standpoint. We're wired to focus on negative information. Like there's, a noise over there. What's that? We want to make sure that we're on high alert for our threats, right? So that we can, get out of harm's way if we're going to be eaten by something. We've evolved into a world where that isn't the case, right? At least not here where I am in Sag Harbor, New York. Nothing's going to jump out and eat me that I'm aware of. So it's how do we, so that's from an evolutionary standpoint. And then we are inundated with so much information, a lot of it negative. And the way we're wired, we're going to focus on the negative information unless we consciously step out of that cycle.
Yeah, this honestly, it's so hard because I I agree with what you're saying. I believe it. I know it's true because I've experienced it, but there's something that happens where when I'm in the midst of experiencing negativity or some emotional thing, and I know this is BS, I can change it.
Mhm.
It's so difficult because the experience of it feels real.
Absolutely.
It is, I mean, it is technically real. Like my heart rate might go up. I might start having a cold sweat. Like all of that's actually happening.
Yes.
Um,
That is not fake.
right.
That is absolutely happening. I can share a story that if you'd like, that
Please.
really like brings this home. It brought it home to me. So it was years ago. My oldest son is now in his 20s, and he was 12 at the time. And this is before I ever studied functional imagery training. We're at a performance at Lincoln Center. The performance was Warhorse. We had great seats because a friend of mine is the artistic director of Lincoln Center. So it was like we were immersed in this. Now, there was no horse in the production, but my son is allergic to horses. The main character in the production is a puppet, and you can see the puppeteers, and the puppet is made of sticks and glue and literally like bicycle parts. So when the production first begins, you see, oh, it's a puppet. You can see the puppeteers. But about midway through the first act, my son, the moment he believed, as the rest of us started to believe in the audience, that the horse was real, he began to have an allergic reaction that was quite substantial. He couldn't breathe. His neck was getting red because normally he gets hives. His imagination turned on histamine reaction in his body that was frightening,
Yeah.
right? So that, in a nutshell, is how our imagination, if we believe something and we elaborate on it, it will activate the body. It will increase our heart rate. It will, it can cause our tongue to swell. It can cause all these things. So there's in no way am I belittling that. That is absolutely real. What happens in our imagination and what we believe to be, we will respond to in a very real way.
I'm not even totally sure they didn't do this, but when the pandemic first started, I was thinking, like, just give people sugar water and tell them it's a cure. Some people it's going to act as a cure on, because if you believe stuff like this, it works.
The placebo effect, right? Yes. And that's accounted for in science. If someone believes that they will get better by doing something, and again, there's a lot of complicated, like, this doesn't work in every situation. Like, I'm very mindful. I have a very good friend struggling with stage 4 cancer, and it's not like he can will his way to health. His body's being ravaged by a disease. So I don't want to make small of these matters, but yes, where we spend our time and our energy, like, you probably spent time and energy. I think, what did you lose? Like close to 200 pounds?
Close to 300 pounds. Like, as of today. And for me, if I want to take a picture and get really lean and like vascularity in my abdomen, that's not sustainable, but I can do that. And then, so I have this cushion, but it's between 285 and 300 pounds on whatever for the last number of years.
Yeah. So what you experienced, as I understand it, is you were when you got there, it was hard to sustain. Like, getting there, you were committed to the destination. Once you got there, it was hard to maintain it.
Well, let me say this: in between that loss, there would be 150 pound swings. I
Which
got
is so hard on you psychologically too.
Oh, it's devastating. I got
brutal.
down to 200 pounds, or just over 200 pounds, and then went back up to over 400 pounds, more than once. And so this is over the course of the last 20 years. But I also had this idea that I, as a very complicated human being, would be solved when I got to some weight. And I had to disillusion myself of that, because none of this has solved me. I still have all my mental garbage. There's some aspects that have gotten better. Like, I can run up a flight of stairs and it's not devastating right now. I don't have to like check the tensile strength of a chair when I sit down. I can put a seatbelt on an airplane. All of that is improved, but it hasn't like alleviated my self negativity. I still have to fight with that. And I do, and I seem to be winning, and I'm very grateful for that. But that has been the hardest thing, this idea that just losing weight was going to make me live in some fantasy,
Yeah, no, we see it in so many fields. There's something called the Olympic blues. So after an athlete, whether they medaled or they didn't medal, after they got to the pinnacle of where they thought life's going to be different now, and then it wasn't, right? Or they weren't like, they came home to kind of normalcy. There's a huge weight and a weight of depression and rumination that happens. So it's a human experience. I'm curious, because when we work with someone, the first place that we begin, it's not just imagery. People are like, oh, I know that, I've done it. But the first place we begin is with something called motivational interviewing, because we want to tap into you and your intrinsic motivation, not extrinsic. It's not like somebody saying, Ethan, you must change, right? Your doctor, right. How many doctors tell people, if you don't stop X, you're going to die, right?
Yeah.
And people don't change their behavior. So that extrinsic motivation doesn't work. It certainly doesn't work long-term. But as you're setting out on a journey, we use this technique called motivational interviewing to really, it's almost like we don't have much personality. we're reflecting and deflecting, and we're kind of summarizing what you said. We're the voice in your head that becomes externalized, right? But we talk a lot about values. So I'm curious, when you set out on this journey to lose so much weight, did you ever think of your value that it was tied to?
Yeah, I will say, and I'm sure this is common for many people today, but
Mhm.
I found what I went through complicated because I was put on diets very, very young, from the time I was like 5 years old.
Wow.
And this and I don't know if my reaction was to suddenly start sneaking food and binge eating because of the diets, or I don't remember 5 all that well, and I'm not sure if I was put on diets because my parents and grandparents observed me sneaking food and binge eating. So I'm not sure where that started, but I do know that I my relationship with food and the way I consumed it was bad for a long time. And so when I was 20 years old, did not care, had no values beyond the present in so much as like, how can I experience pleasure right now? I was also addicted to drugs
Mhm.
and, morbidly obese and had trouble moving around and all of this. And then I started having a relationship with a girl, and suddenly I was thinking about things I was incapable of doing that I wanted to do. I
Mhm.
wanted to, and I never wanted to go on a hike prior to this. A hike was, this kind of thing that was enforced on me as a punishment for being fat,
Right.
until I met somebody who liked hiking and I wanted to hike with them or go and sit comfortably on a beach with them or walk around a museum with them. None of that was interesting to me before. And so it was kind of from that point of view where I went, oh, I'm going to have to. And I first got sober, and that was challenging. And I probably couldn't have even had these thoughts while I was using drugs. But once I was clean for a bit, I
Mhm.
was able to go like, oh, there is actually more out of life that I want that I'm not experiencing.
So what value would you say? I hear you when you say like this was up until that point when you met someone,
Yeah.
um, it was imposed upon you from such an early age. Wow, 5 is such an early age. And then you had this experience of meeting someone. So it was the value of what, would you say?
It was the value of having more um ability with my body, not being confined, not being confined. And by the way, it wasn't just physically confined, it was mentally confined. I was embarrassed to be seen with her in public because I thought that her association with me would be a negative knock on her. I didn't like experiencing that. So I just wanted to have more ability with myself, and I guess the value was more autonomy,
Yeah.
more personal power.
Mhm. Mhm. So, and that's when you say that, is there an emotion attached to that?
There's heavy grief I'm sitting on right now that I could get really emotional with you
Yeah,
about.
no, and I don't want to take you to that place, but
Yeah.
I just want to, because we work with the senses, right? When we can put someone in the future having achieved their goal or not achieved their goal, we're going to take you to both places, and we're going to use 7 senses. So it's the 5 senses that plus we add emotion and motion. Emotion is a game changer when it comes to human behavior. We've seen people follow like people who are completely insane because of the emotion that this person evokes, no matter what side you're on, right? So emotion is a huge driver of consumerism. It's a huge driver of human behavior. And when you tap into a value, I want autonomy because I haven't had autonomy since I was a little kid, right? Now we have emotion. And that emotion you can use when you get to, our book is called The Choice Point. In a day, we probably face 60 conscious decisions or more, right? That we're aware of. Like, am I going to order dessert when I go out to lunch? Am I going to reach for the apple or the chocolate cake? These decisions, am I going to have that difficult conversation or not? The ones that we really contemplate. right? So when you get to a decision, if you're working to have more autonomy, and that's associated with being fit, then when you get to that choice point, you can tap into, am I going with that grief?
No, grief is
Right.
what I was experiencing. Joy, sheer exhilarating joy is getting there.
Yeah, so the joy, then you contrast that to the mind likes black and white. So to choice point, you can use that contrast. I have a choice here, right? That speaks to your autonomy. I have a choice. It's not being imposed on me right now. And oftentimes we go into default. If we don't take this minute and breathe and use our imagery, we'll go into default of, this is easier, I'm tired, I worked a long day, I deserve it. There's all sorts of chatter that can go on that justifies something that's going to take us further from where we want to be, right? So the harder decision is often the one that's linked to a bigger goal.
Yeah, but I think it's fascinating because when you frame it all that way, because even as I said it to you, I can touch it, I can feel it, I get that sensation of, oh yes, it is a joyful thing. Going through that is joyful. It feels empowering.
Yes. Yeah. So if we were working together, once I tapped into what's your goal, right? So there's a clear goal and it's tied to a value that's important to you. There's emotion attached to it. Then I'm going to teach you how to use your senses to be in the future before these choice points happen, so that you have a little bit of a jump on it. But then we can also teach you to use it in the moment. And much like an athlete, we're going to use cues to cue you up, to interrupt the neural pathway. There's 20 years of science that went into this methodology. So it's very specific in how it's dosed out and how we train people based upon the data.
Let me ask you this, because this is what pops up for me, and it's all related to what I experience. But when I do that and I look at my goals, and I find that it's almost the beating that moment of, am I going to have the chocolate cake or am I going to have the apple? And I can associate joy with going for the apple and going towards my goals. That is the moment that it's very real to me. But if my goal is like lose 200 pounds and I arrive at having lost 200 pounds, and I'm expecting the rest of life to be that experience of joy, I'm disappointed when it's not. And so can we talk about that? Is that something you deal with?
Yes, we always and this is at the beginning of the journey, because I was listening to a previous guest you had on, and you were talking about how hard it is to start. We find it's also really hard to finish. And
yes,
we'll talk to people, and some people will give up just before the finish line.
Yeah.
I mean, that could be like, my co-author and business partner works with the Royal British Army and Navy and commandos. And some of these guys, they go through this grueling training and then they give up in the last mile, right? There's like a narrative that gets triggered of, I'm not worthy, or this negative chatter that overwhelms, and they just can't go on, right? When they're so close to something they worked so hard for. So one of the things that we'll do in the beginning, in the early, before we even begin to train someone's ability to use imagery, is we'll say, once you achieve this, Ethan, once you get to this goal, then what?
Right.
Right? We'll do that with Olympians. After you win, or after the Olympics in Paris, then what? Because if I used to compete in the, I love sports and I love outdoor sports, but I used to compete in the equestrian world. And if you're so focused on the perfect distance to a fence, you're in trouble, because that fence comes up on you very quickly and you're on top of a 1,200-pound animal, and you better know where you're going after, right? Or you're going to go off course and you're going to get disqualified, or something worse can happen. So it's, yes, I have my mindset on this, but I'm a bigger human being. My life is bigger than losing 200 pounds. Then what?
Yeah.
And I think
then what is so key, because I think that's part of the reason so many people gain weight again after having lost weight. But even like as you say that, I have a 16-year-old daughter that is in a very, very academically rigorous school, and she was working on this project that took her a year in this school to work on, and she finished it and she was like distraught, and she was like, I don't feel anything that I was expecting to feel, and I don't know what to do with myself. And I said similar things like, okay, you need to make a new goal right now and make a bunch of goals, but like this is a problem on in many different areas that I've experienced, mostly through losing weight and not having a goal set beyond that, but like anything you accomplish, like you're talking about Olympians who get to the Olympics and then it's like their life is over.
They're over. They don't know what to do. They wake up the next day and it's like, what now? Who am I? There is an identity crisis that's so deep because they've given up so much for so many years. Who am I now?
Yeah.
Right. And it can be quite serious. We've had great athletes commit suicide, right? Because they don't have that way of looking past, what their single-minded focus. Single-minded focus is great, and we're all for that. But what's the bigger picture of life? Right. And what happens after that fence? What happens after that? So that we do from early on. And it's just so important because I worked with I think one of my first clients, when I became the first person in the United States to be trained in functional imagery training, which is it's the meat of the book, is this methodology that I can honestly say in my 19 years of being a cognitive behavioral therapist, never had I touched upon something that worked as quickly and as long lasting as this.
Wow.
Right. So when I came home, in order to get certified, they wanted me to have people I didn't charge. Right. So it was separate from my practice. And I would record sessions and send it back to the university. And so one of the first volunteers I had was a physician who, like you, had multiple times lost well over 100 pounds. He would get in like fighting shape. Like he would do like Ironman and then boomerang and beat himself up. It was hard to listen to the story sometimes, because it was like so much suffering involved.
Yeah.
But his foot was either on the gas or it was on the brake. It was go, stop, go. So what he worked with is, okay, I have to find the ability to coast. I can take my foot off the gas and coast and not do this. It was very psychologically abusive.
No, that is exactly me. In 2000, maybe 11, I went and rode every stage of the Tour de France. I could ride a bike for 200 miles and then do it again the next day up the mountains. And I wasn't like, some of these guys who ride in those kind of races are 130 pounds, like they're tiny. I wasn't tiny, but I had no fat on me at all. But I'm a kind of a big guy. And then I went back up to 400 pounds. Like, this is the story of my life. I have, for the past 5 years, continued setting goals, and the coast, I call it maintenance. This is my number one goal right now with myself physically, is find an area where I'm not mentally beating myself up, I'm not physically obsessive, and I'm able to live as close to what I would consider a normal, I do quote normal life, because who's really normal? I think it's so insulting to call people normal. But like the version of that, when I look at people and I go, that's a normal guy.
Right.
And that's what I always wanted. So how do I find that for myself? And I've clobbered it together. I think through a version of like not totally understanding, but doing some of the things you're talking about.
That's so cool that you've done it, through trial and error. And there are things that if we go deep enough, if we struggle long enough, a lot of this is intuitive, right? But how counselors work with whether you're a counselor, a coach, of athletes or individuals, a lot of times people are just doing it the wrong way.
Yeah.
Right. And they don't mean to, but they're actually inflicting so much pressure. And ultimately, that extrinsic motivation is going to be like a car that runs out of gas, and they just don't do it once.
I can't stop thinking about you talking about finding that a lot of the people don't finish, which I think is so true in so many fields. And I keep just thinking, like, if we make this whole thing, whatever this goal is, the entirety of our life, finishing it is very scary, because if you've not thought beyond that, you have nothing. You have no life after that once you've finished. So it makes perfect sense that people would subconsciously not be finishing, simply because there's no more to life. And if you don't finish, then you can continue living this kind of nebulous life that is somewhat meaningless, because you haven't gone beyond whatever this massive milestone you set for yourself was.
Right. You're going outside your comfort zone in some way to finish.
Yeah.
Because then it's like, now there's a new story, a new narrative, and then what?
Right.
Right. So one of the things I love in our book is so back to the British Royal Commando training. So it's out on the British moors. It's dark, it's cold, it's wet. There are these davits in the ground, and sometimes there are snakes in them, and you can twist your ankle, you can break your ankle. And there's always a warm minivan within, just a few hundred meters. And you're told from the get-go, anytime you want, you can stop, get in that warm minivan. There's hot chocolate, going to be comfortable. This wasn't meant for you. Right. And they kind of like, they externalize the voice in your head. They're like, maybe you're a quitter. Maybe you need to go. Right. And so they get to the end point, and they're carrying like so much gear, and they have, they're just tired, wet, cold, and done. And the sergeant says, you're not done. You have to run back.
Oh.
Now, 2-hour run there. So one guy throws his hands up in the air. He's like, I'm out. Why? Because he's focused on his suffering. The other guy focuses on, he was like, it's all expectation. Oh, I knew they were going to throw a monkey wrench. Making it to a commando, it's not like a linear straight path. They're going to throw things at you to see if you can psychologically handle it. Kind of laughs to himself. All right. And he pictures his family, and he pictures his finish line. So now he's transcended the suffering. And it turns out they don't have to run all the way home. It's just a mile. And then he gets in the minivan, and there's the guy who gave up. And they're two very different experiences as they're having their hot chocolate. Right. And it's just that split-second decision where, you get to decide, am I going to focus on how hard this is and the struggle and how much I want to get in that van? Or am I going to really focus on like my life when I'm a commando? It's my uncle was a commando. It's something I want. And I want, so it's just like the ability for the mind to leave the lower fear elevations and get to something higher, that we found that people transcend pain.
Yeah. The perspective bit that you're talking about, for me, I can look at all the discomfort that I experienced at 550 pounds and go, that was chronic. That was a nonstop, basically excruciating level of discomfort all the time. And in order to avoid that, I have to have a little acute discomfort every day. And the trade-off is fantastically simple in those terms. It is just not, you cannot compare.
It's beautiful. And then you can use that, a cue can be a mantra like that.
Yeah.
I'm anticipating a little bit of discomfort each day.
Yeah.
Right?
And that is going to avoid the life of misery that, and I mean like mentally and literally physically miserable. Everything hurt. you couldn't sit in the same place for a long time because the amount of weight pressing down on joints got to be too much. Like, it was real pain. So I go to the gym and I have to push myself through a workout that's pretty brief in these days, 45 minutes to an hour plus a little cardio.
Mhm.
And that's it. That's all I have to do. I mean, there's certainly, I'm simplifying it. There's more to it than that. I also have to withhold myself from binge eating McDonald's, right? But
Right.
that's it. That's all I have to do basically to never have that situation happen again. It's a mind-bogglingly easy trade.
Yeah, and the using of the imagery technique is pretty easy, right? So if I'm doing this interview and suddenly I don't know, a chocolate biscuit pops into my head and I'm like, oh wow, that would be so nice to have a biscuit with my tea. And now I'm elaborating on it, right? And the more I elaborate on it, the more I'm likely to excuse myself, get up and get it. But I can be, oh yeah, the biscuit again. But how do I want to feel when I fit into that, you know, that suit that I'm going to wear on the Today Show, right? So we can take, cravings are imagery based, right? The McDonald's binging is imagery based. You can smell it, you can taste it, you can hear the paper unwrapping, but you can change that to the imagery of what it's going to be like when you have this life with more autonomy, right? And you can contrast that grief with that joy and be like, and because the mind can't hold two opposing images at once, it's the one that you focus on is the one that you're going to act on.
Is the recognition that we are programmed to dwell on negativity for safety's sake, is that a necessary step? Because I think that's helpful to know that, like, hey, this is why I'm doing that. And this is why I need to do something else. This is why I need to substitute that thought with another thought.
Yeah, and yeah, then it's like it's expectation and it's use the word normalized, right? It's like, oh, there's not something wrong with me, right? This is the way I'm wired. I often say to people with anxiety, like, you're wired to survive. In an evolutionary standpoint, you would be a great survivor because you're aware of everything, but we're going to tone that down a little, right? So if the expectation is this isn't a bad thing, this is a normal human experience, but we don't have to live that way, because living that way takes us out of joy, takes us out of the moment, takes us out of creativity to
Yeah.
imagine something differently.
Right. Right. I mean, but it's also creative. It's also creative. Is it
Totally
a
creative.
creative process? Like, you got to get creative to do it.
Yeah, and then some people will say, because we talk about imagery and we think everyone does it the same way, but the truth is some people can't visualize. They'll close their eyes and see nothing. There's a small percentage of people, I think it's like 3%, that may have aphantasia. So when they were kids in school reading a book and everyone's imagining the scene, they're not imagining the scene, right?
Oh,
But
that
they
sounds
go through their,
horrible. That
they
does
go
not
through their,
sound fun at all.
yeah, but it's a real thing. Like Oliver Sacks, who is a great writer, he had it. And so, but people, so we have something called the PSIQ. It's a Plymouth Imagery Inventory. People can go to on our site and download it for free, but you can see what part of your senses have you highly developed awareness of, and what part are you missing? Because we find that you need 3 or more senses involved in this for it to really work.
So then when you're trying to do that, you would want to incorporate those senses.
Yes.
Okay. And those senses are more than just the tactile, sight, smell, taste.
Yeah, it's more than that. It's more than what you see, what you smell, what you taste, what you feel. It's what emotion do you have? Can you see your body moving? And then some people, when they do the inventory, maybe they've had COVID and they lost the sense of smell. So you can say, can you smell this? No, I can't smell this. But we can work on smell coming back, even if it's not literally coming back. It's coming back in the imagination. Can you remember the smell of your grandmother's house? Yes.
Right.
Now we can tap into that.
Yeah,
right?
the smell of the ocean, you know, if you
Yes.
want to go for a run on the ocean and that's part of this beautiful picture you've created as a goal, that's a cool one to put in there, the feel of sand in your toes and how great it's going to feel to run.
Yes. Yeah, the more sensory, the more, tactile, the more you have a memory of what's it like, what's it smell like. Taste is another big one. Like we often leave that out. People will leave it out if they're doing practices of putting someone in the future. And taste is really important because it's quite powerful. Is there a taste associated with that heaviness? Right. So the more we can engage, we're basically getting out of the thoughts, which are negative, into our senses and putting ourselves in the future situation. So that by the time we get there, we respond in a way that's in alignment with us, our goals, our bigger dreams. Otherwise, it's just like Groundhog's Day.
Yeah.
95% of our thoughts are the same as the day before. Roughly 80% or more are negative. So we are wired to do the same thing, the same amount of negativity. But we find when you teach people, well, you can train your brain using this imagery technique, like some crazy stuff happens.
Yeah, I think for the longest time I just took for granted that my thoughts were my thoughts, and if I was having a good time in life, my thoughts seemed to be more positive, and so I needed to have, I needed to work very hard towards having a good time in life. But then you do look like I've traveled pretty extensively around the world, and you realize, like, people who are having a much worse time than I am, certainly in material sense,
Mhm.
are doing just fine, and some people who are doing a lot better than me in a material sense are having a rough go of it. So it's completely subjective in those terms, and like getting getting to the point where I can recognize that a thought is just a thought and that doesn't mean that it's real. That was a big deal for me.
That is a very big deal for anybody. Or that negative voice in your head isn't you,
Right.
right? That's not really telling you something that's you.
Yeah.
Right. So if you can externalize that, so it's not like, oh, I have to listen to this voice. And you can see a thought and know that it's you can choose like a train in the station. You're going to go out with that thought or you're going to let that one go.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, this is it. I mean, it really is so exciting. So you're the only person in America that does this.
Well, I was the first person trained in it. I read about it, and it was actually a client of mine who, it was a corporate client, and they wanted me to design a weight loss program. So I went online and I was like, what's the most significant weight loss study? And then I found functional imagery training, and I emailed them and they said, we're doing a training. Why don't you come over? You'd actually be the first person in the US that we train. They just started training members of the public, like healthcare people and therapists. So I went over, and then after getting then certified, then one of the researchers reached out to me and said, I really like your website, and I wonder if you want to write a book together. And then in doing that, we've started to train. We've probably trained 50 people in the US, and we're training more. So like, my desire is to alleviate human suffering and make a profit, right? So
Okay.
I think that if you can combine those two things, then you're in good shape. But yeah, we want to train a lot of people in this because a lot of people, well-intentioned people, are doing it wrong. I see coaches all the time. I'm a rower now. I give up riding for rowing. And I see them I see kids who will never get near the water again because they've been pushed too hard, or they've just, the passion's been driven out of them.
Right. Yeah. So you're a rower, actually a rower, like sculls on
Yeah.
water.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool. I did when I talked about how my various iterations of being fit. There was a version of me that did a full marathon on an rowing erg,
Wow.
which was really hard.
That's no picnic. That
Yeah,
is,
no picnic at all. But again, like I'm way too scared to try to do it on water because there's then the balance portion that freaks me out.
As long as both oars are out, you're fine. You can be in the narrowest boat, but those oars like really give you the balance. And a coach said to me, you're a perfect rower. And I thought he was talking about my form. He said, psychologically, you're competitive, you're lazy, and you're smart. And I said, can we just substitute lazy for efficient? And that's what fit is, right? It's like, we can teach people this, and we find like 6 or 8 sessions and they get it.
Right.
And we start small, like maybe they want to improve one thing in their life. We work with a lot of corporate people or leaders, and they play a sport as a hobby. Okay, let's start with that, because now you're kind of like, the stakes aren't that high. You enjoy it. You can play with it. The imagination likes playfulness, right? If you're too like, you must do this, then your imagination sort of like, I'm out. So you want to start with something that they can like play around with. And then once they get it, they're like, wow, can I use this with other things? Oh, yeah, I
Right.
can use it with other things.
Yeah, I guess the framework that this conversation begins with is weight loss. That's generally what I'm interested in. But in reality, this is any aspect of life. This applies to any of it.
Anything. But I think weight loss, I love that we're having this conversation because it's so exploited.
Yeah.
There's so many false promises, and I see people go through surgeries and now they're on this special diabetic medicine, or and like, but there's so much like, do this, do that, do this, people imposing really difficult things on the body,
Yeah.
right? And really profiting from we know gyms, right? They market beginning of the year, all sorts of sales, and they know most people quit by mid-February.
Yeah.
Right. So there hasn't been like this kind of investment up until like Weight Watchers was the most successful study up until the functional imagery training one, without using medication.
Oh, really? Weight Watchers was massively successful for people.
It was very successful for the first, as I understand it, up until 6 months. That was sort of the
Right.
average. And then people sort of plateau. What they found in the functional imagery training exercise and weight loss study is that after 6 months, people continue to lose weight. A year later, they're continuing to exercise, because it's a tool that you can use every day.
Right.
And it's not imposing. You don't have to put your calories in a phone. It's not telling you to do this or that. You can adapt it and use it in a way that serves you. But it's like an inside out job.
Yeah. Well, and that is the most interesting piece, because what I think I was most dissatisfied with every time I lost weight was the inside there was no change at all. I mean, nothing. And it was kind of like what my daughter expressed when she finished this project at school, which was finishing it was devastating because she had nothing else to do. And she expected this joy she expected an experiential thing associated with finishing it. And when that didn't happen, it was devastating. And that was basically my experience every time I lost weight. There was no change. I kept waiting for that inside change to occur. It never did. And so when I went, okay, the two things aren't really connected. And if they are, I'm doing it backwards. Change the way I think. And that might help with achieving this goal and having it sustained.
Absolutely. But what a great opportunity for you to talk to your daughter, right? About
Yeah.
like, yeah, this probably isn't the first time this will happen to you. Right. So how do you handle it? Right. So it's like an opportunity, not that you did anything wrong in saying, let's choose a goal right away, but there's an opportunity to process like, oh, wow, like you worked so hard and you expected it to be different.
Yeah.
And that's really hard on you.
Yeah.
So what can you learn from this for next time? Like, what would you tell somebody who's in, a few years from now, if this happens to your younger cousin, what advice would you give them? Right. So like expectation is huge. I expected it to be different when I finished. I expected it to be different when I came home with a medal. I expected it to be different when I lost 200 pounds. But okay, now we can have a conversation around that, right?
Right.
Because if we just move on to the next thing, we lose that opportunity to have that really meaningful conversation.
Yeah, no, you're right. I actually having this conversation with you, I need to her school, she's in a boarding school, so she's not at home, but like I need to call her and revisit this and go check in with her because I had that conversation with her and then kind of just went like, well, she's going to be fine now. She's made new goals. But I think it is there is a bit more to it than that because I didn't make sure that like when you get to the end of the next goal, let's see, is this still happening, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And then if we're so tied to our goals, I've seen with great like athletes, right? They get injured and wow, that's an identity crisis. Like, who am I if I can't go to the gym? Who am I if I can't compete in my sport? Like, who are my friends? Like, what's my purpose?
Yeah.
Right. So it's a great opportunity to, rather than be like, oh my goodness, that's right. Like, yeah, like, okay, who are you if you don't go to the gym and if you don't do these other things? Part of why I gave up riding is I shattered my shoulder in an injury. And it was the kind of like fall where I didn't know if I'd walk again.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you've ever broken a shoulder, but I had like, it was bad. I had plates and screws and multiple surgeries. And it's like, that's like a major, like, you can't do anything. You fear everything.
Yeah.
And I remember reading about my surgeon a night when I was like in so much pain. And I read about him thinking he must have done something wrong. I have to look him up. Are there complaints about him on the internet? But what I found was that he had gotten this humanitarian award from the US military because he had gone over to Afghanistan to help the doctors well, it was in Germany. It was for soldiers who would be medevaced from Afghanistan. And he went over with this great bravado, like, I'm going to show them how to put human bones back together. And the first guy was he was a triple amputee. And in that moment, he was like, there was nothing I could do. And I read it and I thought, I'm never going to complain about pain in my shoulder. I literally, that night, I said that to myself. And I can tell you, Ethan, it has not come back. And that was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It was just like something switched in my head that like, I'm not focusing on this because I have an arm and I'm grateful for it. So gratitude is a huge part of imagery too.
Okay, I have a question on this because I find myself doing similar things, and then I wonder if psychologically it's okay the way I'm doing it because it's all framed kind of in the way you framed it, where it's based on something else. It's like I'm happy with this because I can see there's bigger problems out there that people are dealing with, you know, and is that fine?
That is fine. Absolutely. Again, it's elaboration. Are you going to elaborate on, I'm not happy with this because I should be like my neighbor who has X, Y, and Z. If you continue to elaborate on it, that's where your mind's going to go, your energy is going to go, your attention's going to go, and your behavior is going to go. But if you're able to transcend that with gratitude, then your mind's going to go there, your attention's going to go there, your behavior's going to go there.
Yeah. Yeah. I get so grateful for everything. My wife is often like, don't be too grateful. You still have to, there's still work to do. You can't retire, you know? And I'm like, I don't know. It's pretty great. Like life is pretty good. I don't know what else I have to do. I can just like bask in how great it is sometimes.
Yeah, I
But
mean, you can see the same scene, right? I was just walking my dog and there's a gentleman unloading something from the car. I didn't know him, but we were just like, what a beautiful day and how lucky are we, right? But I could pass by somebody else who's, they're upset because their lawn is brown and they can't stop thinking about how upset they are that their lawn is brown. And then it spills over into everything,
Right.
right? Like, then they're going to lose their temper at somebody. But what you're choosing to elaborate on is really the essence of who you're going to become.
Yeah, and with that, I find that, like, you know, you can't create anything without destroying something else. Even the process of breathing, you're burning up one thing and releasing something else, right? And
Yes.
so, like, you want to build a house, you're going to chop something down, you want to cook, something's dying in order for us to eat, whether it's vegetables or animals. And, like, this is just life, and life also has decay in it. And we also, and, like, if we can't find something beautiful at every stage, right? If we can't look around at a dilapidated building, even abandoned, spray painted on, and go like, yeah, I see something beautiful there too. I think I think we're just we're missing some beauty in life. I really do. I can look at a ghost town and see some beauty, or something that existed 100 years ago and then was left to rot, and that can be beautiful too.
Yeah, I think, I just read an article on Gen Zers, and it's so like tragic to me in terms of, like, they don't want to debate like in school, right? They're like, oh, I don't want to have like the wrong opinion because then I'll get canceled or whatever. But in our work, you have to have difficult conversations. And in ecology, in two ecosystems that come together where there's friction, create a stronger ecosystem,
Yeah.
unless we're just, nobody's listening and we're just, so this idea of, like, can you appreciate life and death because it's part of life, and can you appreciate this process and not get so rigid in your mind that I won't be well until I lose X amount of weight, I won't be right until my lawn is green, like that rigidity. And then the elaboration on that rigidity causes a tremendous amount of suffering. If we can get that altitude on life, it's such a different experience. And then if we can pay attention to, if I really want to change something, I'm going to have to change the images in my mind.
It is part of it, the necessity to be able to, for ourselves, because I've found, like, I can't frame things as good or bad anymore. It's very hard for me to frame things as good or bad. I can put it in a context where I consider it bad, but, like, in absolute terms, I become kind of a moral relativist to a degree. This upsets my wife to no end, because she's like, some things are absolutely good and some things are absolutely bad. And I go, like, I'll I would have to work hard, but I could find a context where maybe it's not bad, or it wasn't bad 300 years or whatever.
Mhm.
But do we have to be able to challenge our own perceptions of truth? Because there are thoughts that I have that I take for granted are just true. And even if I'm applying them only to myself and saying it doesn't have to be true for anybody else, but this is my truth, that I've found I have to challenge myself on it and go, like, is that really true?
Yeah, I think that you're a highly evolved human being.
It's
Just,
not easy.
no, it's not easy, but I joined a meditation group, and I have a beautiful teacher who's said that this black and white thinking in Buddhism is a cause of human suffering, right? It's either this or that,
Right.
right? So the teacher said to us one day, it's neither this nor that, neither nor both.
Right.
And
And
everything is a projection. Everything, the idea that you think you're right and someone's wrong, and so it's a very humbling place. It takes some more work. It's certainly not as popular, but I think it's healthier in a way.
yeah, I think so too. And in thinking that, I would love people to share this, but again, I come from the place of, like, if your truth says there are these absolutes, I'm not going to argue with you about them. But I do find it very, very helpful in, like, okay, you have a goal that seems insurmountable to you. Maybe your thoughts are creating that
Mhm.
impossibility. Maybe your truths, things you are saying are absolutely true, are getting in your own way. And like, if we don't even have to talk about how rigid culture has become today, but like just each individual with in dealing with themselves, there could be a little bit more flexibility with that.
Yeah, unless, I used to run groups for kids in some of the toughest high schools in Miami. And, one student came and she turned her chair and wouldn't face us, had on backwards glasses. And it took, I didn't say like, hey, you better turn around and join this group or whatever, because they were there because they were referred to be there. And I figured she needed to be there. The counselors referred her. But it took a long time for her to turn her chair around, to take her glasses off and talk, right? But like having that, holding that space for her was really important until she felt safe enough to talk. And I think that there's just so much, you have to do it this way or that way, or I think that really limits us from really connecting as human beings. One of my first clients at NYU was, and then forced me to work with her. I went and said to my counselor, I can't possibly work with somebody who did this to their child. It was a child, a parent accused of neglect. And she was like, well, find a way. And by the end of our time together, I realized that could have been me had I been high, had I had a different life.
Yeah.
But I had to transcend my judgment of her file to get through that. And in doing that, I became, I think, more human, I hope. But I
Yeah.
wasn't like, well, I'm better than you, and I would never do that to my child, because what does that mean?
Where does that get us? It doesn't get us anywhere. Yeah, exactly. It is what it is. And we can either suffer or we can find a way to make lemonade out of lemons. I mean, really, and it is just a matter of like how we think about it.
Yeah. In the end, this client taught me more about myself than anybody. And I learned the power of non-judgment,
Right.
which was extremely powerful, of like listening to understand rather than listening to talk.
Yeah.
So, and that is a huge part of our work. We listen to understand our clients, and we just assume they're the expert in their life. And then we teach them this technique and they're off and running. And suddenly they're quitting their job and they're surfing in Australia. And I'm like, wow, they're really following their dream.
Right. That's amazing. Right. I mean, I like, as I think about this, my wife, she should be a little scared because who knows what we're going to do. You know what I mean?
No, time and time again, John and I were talking about like, wow, did you hear that Dr. is moving Australia, going, but yeah, they're like up and doing it. They're not waiting for one day when all the ingredients are right, I'll do X, Y, and Z. They're like, let's do it. Let's figure out how to do it now. It's actually a beautiful thing. And then when you be scared of it or your wife to be scared, but when you really tap into this, there's a bit of like a superpower that happens that I don't even think science has begun to explain.
Well, it does take the pressure of needing to put all your ducks in a row for anything, because the ducks are also all in your head, right? So like, if the ducks are in my head, they're in a row if I want them to be in a row, or they're not if I don't. And it's entirely my choice.
You would love my Buddhist teacher.
Yeah. Well, I can't wait to read your book, Joe.
I'm so
This has
excited
been
too.
fantastic. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. And I think you're a great actor. I've appreciated your work. And this has been so nice to be in your head a little bit and in your life. And I can't wait for you to read it. And maybe we'll
Me
have another
too.
conversation down the line.
Yes, please.
Okay, and call your daughter.
I'm going to.